Welcome to What If, the podcast that takes a hard look at the hypothetical. I'm your host, David. Each week, we explore a question that pushes the boundaries of our understanding of the universe, and we do it with the help of someone who actually understands it. Today, we're joined once again by Dr. Matt Stirling, a theoretical physicist and cosmologist whose job is literally to imagine the unimaginable and then do the math. Matt, thanks for coming back on the show.
It's a pleasure, David. Although I must admit, the scenario you've proposed for today is one of the more chilling thought experiments I've run through my model.
That's what we'd like to hear. So let's dive right in. The big question for today's episode is this. What would happen if planet Earth's axial tilt suddenly disappeared? Now, for our listeners, just give us a quick primer. What is the axial tilt and why is it so important?
Of course. Imagine a spinning top. It rarely spins perfectly upright. It usually has a bit of a wobble, a lean to one side. Earth is the same. As it spins on its axis, it isn't perfectly vertical relative to its orbit around the sun. It's tilted by about 23.5 degrees.
Right, and that's what gives us our seasons.
Precisely. When the northern hemisphere is tilted towards the sun, it's summer for them and winter for the southern hemisphere, and vice versa. This gentle, cyclical change is the engine of our planet's climate. Dictates everything from weather patterns to agriculture, animal migration, and frankly, the evolution of life itself.
Okay, so the stage is set. Our planet is leaning comfortably at 23.5 degrees. Now let's break it. Matt, what happens in the first hour, the first day, if that tilt just snaps to zero?
Well, the word suddenly is the most terrifying part of your question. The planet is a massive spinning object with enormous angular momentum. To change its orientation instantly would require an incomprehensible amount of force and would release an even more incomprehensible amount of energy. The immediate effect would be geological. The crust, the oceans, the atmosphere, they would all try to adjust to this new orientation. The result would be the most violent earthquakes imaginable, everywhere on the planet at once. Volcanoes on every continent would erupt. The oceans would slosh out of their basins, creating global tsunamis thousands of feet high.
So it's an extinction-level event right out of the gate, before we even get to the climate effects.
Oh, absolutely. The initial jolt would likely scour the surface of all complex life. But for the sake of the thought experiment, let's assume some pockets of humanity survived this initial cataclysm, perhaps deep underground. What kind of planet would they emerge to?
Exactly. Let's get to the long term. What does a 0-degree tilt Earth look like? Before we move on to the long-term climate, let's linger on this initial cataclysm for a moment. You've mentioned earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis. What about the atmosphere? Would we be able to breathe?
It would be a planet of brutal, permanent extremes. With no tilt, the sun would be perpetually directly overhead at the equator every single day, all year long. The tropics would be subject to an unrelentingly scorching heat far more intense than anything we experience today. My model suggests surface temperatures there would stabilize at levels that would boil water. That's a crucial point, David. The atmospheric consequences would be just as catastrophic. The immense energy from the snap would create a global firestorm, incinerating everything on the surface. Simultaneously, the volcanic eruptions would be on a scale we've never seen, pumping enough ash and sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere to completely black out the sun. Any survivors in underground bunkers would emerge to a world in total darkness.
Boil water. So the entire equatorial band of the planet becomes uninhabitable, a literal furnace. So a nuclear winter scenario, but caused by geology instead of war. And after this planetary reset, the survivors crawl out to face a world with a permanently broken climate system. Let's delve deeper into that. You mentioned the mid-latitudes being stuck in perpetual autumn. What would that actually look like for any surviving ecosystems?
Correct. A scorched, sterile desert. Meanwhile, at the poles, the opposite would occur. The sun would never rise above the horizon. It would just circle around it, its light barely grazing the surface. The north and south poles will be plunged into a permanent, deep-freezing twilight, far colder than any Antarctic winter we know.
And the first casualty of all this is seasons.
Seasons would cease to exist. Every day would be the same as the last. For any given location on the planet, the climate would be locked in place. The mid-latitudes, where most of humanity currently lives, places like Europe, North America, much of Asia, would be stuck in a perpetual unchanging spring or autumn.
That doesn't sound so bad at first glance. Permanent autumn sounds quite pleasant.
It seems so, but this is a profound ecological trap. Our entire system of agriculture is based on seasonal cycles. Plants have evolved to grow fruit and lie dormant based on changing light and temperature. Without seasons, most of our staple crops would fail. They wouldn't know when to germinate or when to produce seed. The entire food chain would collapse.
Right, an ecological collapse. But what about the weather? With a boiling equator and frozen poles, that temperature difference has to create some chaos. Chaos
Is an understatement. The temperature gradient between the equator and the poles will be far more extreme than it is now. This differential is what drives our weather. The hot air from the equator rises and moves towards the poles, while cold air from the poles sinks and moves towards the equator. On a zero-tilt Earth, this process will be put on steroids. You would have two enormous continent-sized weather sails, one in the northern hemisphere, one in the southern. The result will be permanent, planet-girdling storms of unimaginable violence. We're talking about winds that would make a Category 5 hurricane seem like a summer breeze, and these winds would never, ever stop.
Wow, so these habitable zones of perpetual autumn wouldn't be so pleasant after all. They'd be scoured by constant, ferocious winds.
Precisely. The surface will be largely uninhabitable. Any survivors would have to live underground, not just for shelter from the initial event, but forever.
Let's talk about the ice and oceans. You said the poles would be in a permanent deep freeze. So would the ice caps grow and sea levels fall?
That's the logical assumption, and indeed any moisture that reached the poles would freeze and stay there, likely expanding the ice sheets over millennia. However, there's a much more violent and immediate effect on the oceans. The equator seas will be superheated. This will cause a colossal amount of water to evaporate, pumping the atmosphere full of water vapor, which is a potent greenhouse gas. This will create a runaway feedback loop. The planet gets hotter, which boils more water, which makes the planet even hotter. The sky will be choked with a thick, permanent cloud cover, trapping heat and creating a suffocating human environment everywhere outside the frigid polar zones.
A runaway greenhouse effect. So it's a steam house planet. That's terrifying.
Indeed, you'd have three distinct bands, a boiling, scorching hot equator, two ferociously stormy hot and humid mid-latitude bands, and two frozen, dark, sterile poles. There would be no overlap, no gentle transition, just hard, violent borders between these climate zones.
So what's the bottom line from your models, Matt? Is there any scenario where humanity adapts and survives on this new Earth?
It's bleak, David. The word suddenly is the killer. The initial geological trauma would be almost impossible to survive. But even if we did, the planet that's left is fundamentally hostile to the biology that evolved on it. Our life, our DNA is coded for a world with a 23.5-degree tilt. Survival would mean abandoning the surface entirely. It would mean building self-sustaining ecosystems deep underground, powered by geothermal or nuclear energy. It would mean forgetting the sun, the sky, the wind, except as a terrifying, destructive force. Humanity would become a species of miners and tunnel dwellers forever.
And what about the day-night cycle? Would that still exist?
Yes, the planet would still spin, so you'd have day and night, but it would be a strange experience. At the equator, the sun would rise straight up, pass directly overhead, and set straight down. 12 hours of day, 12 hours of night, with no twilight. In the mid-latitudes, the sun would rise to a certain angle and stay there, tracing a lower arc across the sky. And at the poles, it would just be a dot of light circling the horizon forever.
It's just incredible how one single parameter, this 23.5-degree lean, is the difference between our world and that that planetary nightmare you've just described.
It is the definition of a finely tuned system. We live on a knife's edge. Our tilt is stabilized by our large moon, which is another happy accident. Without the moon, Earth's tilt would likely wobble chaotically over millions of years, shifting from 0 to perhaps as much as 85 degrees.
That's a topic for another episode, I think. A world without a moon.
A worthy and equally frightening sequel.
So, to summarize, if Earth's tilt suddenly disappeared, the immediate result is a global cataclysm of earthquakes and tsunamis that likely ends us then and there. If we survive, we emerge to a world without seasons, a boiling equator, frozen poles, and perpetual planet-killing storms in between.
That's the grim reality my models point to. The Earth would become profoundly inhospitable. It underscores how delicate and precious the balance of our world truly is. It's a small tilt, a gentle wobble, but it's the wobble of life.
The wobble of life. I like that. Matt, this has been both fascinating and utterly terrifying. Thank you for painting such a vivid picture for us.
The pleasure was all mine, David. It's a sobering reminder not to take our little corner of the cosmos for granted.
That's all the time we have for this episode of What If. A huge thank you to Dr. Matt Sterling. Join us next week when we'll be asking another crazy scenario. Don't forget to like and subscribe.